Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lesson 5 about Germany. Today we're looking at the crisis in the Ruhr Valley and the causes of hyperinflation. Your LO today is to look at why the situation in Germany got worse in 1923, and your starter is to explain why the cap putsch failed. So let's go ahead, pause the video, write down our title, LO, and starter, and give it a go. When you're finished, go ahead and hit play to resume, and we'll take up the starter together. So why did the cap putsch fail? Well, we'll remember the cap putsch was started by Wolfgang Kapp in 1920, and it was his attempt to use the Freikorps to overthrow the government in Berlin. And it failed because it needed support of the workforce in Berlin. The workers, they thought, if I go ahead and support Kapp, I might lose my job. It's already bad enough right now in Germany. I'm just glad that I have work to begin with, so I'm not going to support him. I'm going to refuse to go on strike, and that will actually cause the cap putsch to fail. We've got three key terms today, a little bit less than usual. We have passive resistance, hyperinflation, and enmities. If you'd like to go ahead and pause, try to match up where they go, and when you're ready to resume, we'll take them up together. So let's look at passive resistance. It's a way of opposing somebody without using any kind of force. We'll have learned about passive resistance from Martin Luther King. So he was an example of someone who didn't use violence or force, but he resisted a thing in society. So for example, his racism that he didn't like, and he did so peacefully. The Germans are going to do the same against the French and the Belgians in trying to stop paying reparation payments, and we'll look at exactly how they did that in a few moments. Hyperinflation, we learned, means extremely high inflation. Money becomes almost worthless. And enmities is another word for hatred or kind of bad feelings that someone might have. So check those, make sure they're written down correctly, and when you're ready, hit play, and we'll resume. So just a little reminder about the Treaty of Versailles and reparation payments. Germany could not keep up with the reparation payments of 6,600 million pounds. It was just too much money for them to pay back. And in 1921, they actually didn't make any payments, which frustrated the French to no end. At the same time as well, they lost 13% of the land, which meant a lot less wealth in the country. So you can think of all the timber supply, the oil, natural gas, even animals and crops that you can grow on that 13% of land that was lost. It meant Germany had even less money than they did before. To try and reclaim some of the money that was owed under the Treaty of Versailles, France sent soldiers into the Ruhr, and this was Germany's main industrial area, so kind of where all the factories were. A lot of times students say, well, why didn't the German soldiers just fight back? Well, they weren't allowed to be in the Rhineland. This was a condition of the Treaty of Versailles that the Rhineland was to become what we call a demilitarized zone, meaning you can't have soldiers there. On top of that, we know that Germany's army was limited to only 100,000 soldiers, which is not nearly enough to fight back against any other kind of military force. So for those reasons, the French are going to march into the Ruhr, and they're going to try and take back some of the value that they're owed, and they'll do so by invading the factories and taking the products from those factories. So here we can see on the map an image of where the Ruhr is. So this area here is the Ruhr, and this is the Rhineland. So France, they don't actually have that far to go. They just have to kind of march through this area of the Rhineland where there's no German soldiers, remember, and here they are, they're into the Ruhr. Belgium, they don't have very far to go either. Very short march across the Rhineland area here and into the Ruhr they go. And this is going to be that main industrial area of Germany where all the factories are. Let's get back to the topic of passive resistance and what actually happened in the invasion in the Ruhr. So here we have a German man and we've got a French soldier. Now the French soldier doesn't look too impressed. He actually has his rifle pointed at the man. And the man doesn't seem all that concerned. He knows that the French soldier is most likely not going to hurt him because it could spark another war. But these two men are showing the enmities, the hatreds that they have for each other. The German man hates the French, and the French, well, he certainly hates the Germans because they're not paying up under the Treaty of Versailles. Now, to avoid the French soldiers from taking things out of the factories, so such as automobiles and whatnot that we can see in the background, the Germans are going to sabotage their factories. they're going to just burn them down or flood them. And this will mean that if the Germans can't keep the products, then no one can. Some strikers were shot, and again, this brought back really old memories of the First World War. What this means is because the factories are destroyed, it's going to be very difficult for the French to recoup any of the money that they're expecting under the Treaty of Versailles. So with the factories burned down and the mines flooded, all the people that worked in those factories are now out of a job. They were viewed as heroes across Germany, but that didn't mean that they would still get a paycheck. So the government decided to execute a plan. They'll just print off more money. And the more money you print off, you actually devalue the banknotes. Now, when we do come back to school and we'll be able to look at some banknotes in the lesson, we'll see how this works in practice. But in theory, we'll look at it this way. If you have 5 bars of gold in your government's treasury and you have 5 banknotes, that means 1 banknote equals 1 bar of gold. But if you introduce more banknotes, that means they're going to be worth less. So if we have 5 bars of gold and now we have 10 banknotes, that means each bar of gold is worth 2 banknotes. The more banknotes we add, the less they're going to become worth unless we increase the amount of gold in the country. And this extra printing of money combined with less production is what's going to lead to hyperinflation, meaning that money is going to become completely worthless. So let's take a look at some banknotes. We have physical copies of these in school. However, we're just going to look at images of them, and they're actually to scale. So they're the same size as what they would be if you were to hold them in your hand. So have a look at the German banknotes. What do you notice about these banknotes? So let's write that down in our books. What do we notice about these banknotes? Record that down in our note. And we have a banknote from February of 1923, August, and October of 1923. So what do we notice about the size? What do we notice about the value of them? What do we notice about the color and the ink? Let's try to answer these questions. So go ahead, pause the video. When you're ready, hit resume. So you've had a chance to look at these banknotes now. What do we notice about the value? Well, we can see the value is increasing significantly. It doesn't mean that they're worth more. It actually means that they're worth less. The higher the value on the banknote means that you need more and more and more of them to buy the same product. So we go from 100,000 all the way up to 10 million marks within the course of, we're looking at 9 months. What you notice about the size? They're getting smaller, and that meant that you could actually make more banknotes with less paper. And this was the German government's method of trying to fix the problem. Just make more money. And what you notice about the ink? Well, the first banknote is fully using, or it's fully covered in ink. If we look at the remaining 2, there's a lot less ink being used. Again, trying to save money in producing these. Your next task is to listen to the reading on the following slide. You can pause the video when the reading is done to be able to go back and make a few key point notes. When you're finished that, we'll be moving on to our final task today.
The Weimar government's main crisis occurred in 1923, when the Germans failed to make a reparations payment on time, which set off a train of events. The French invaded the Ruhr to take goods by force. The Weimar government ordered workers to follow passive resistance, whereby they stopped working and did not produce anything that the French could take. The workers obeyed and the Ruhr area stopped producing goods. However, the workers still needed wages. The government printed more money for the workers, but this soon became worthless with inflation. Hyperinflation. A sudden flood of paper money entered the economy, and a general strike meant that no goods were being manufactured. These factors meant there was more money chasing fewer goods. This, combined with a weak economy ruined by the war, all resulted in hyperinflation. Prices ran out of control, e.g. a loaf of bread cost 250 marks in January 1923 rose to 200,000 million marks in November 1923. Germany's currency became worthless. Middle-class people with savings were particularly badly hit.
So we've made a few key point notes about hyperinflation. Your final task is to write the top 5 facts you know about hyperinflation. We have 2 images here to kind of help us along the way. Now we can see on the left-hand side, we have some children. They didn't have enough money to buy building blocks or Legos or anything similar, so they're actually using stacks of money as building blocks. This money was totally worthless. No shops would take it because you needed to bring a whole lot of it with you to buy something very small. And this man here is an illustration of that. All of this money, there has to be hundreds of thousands of marks there, which is similar to saying hundreds of thousands of pounds. He's going off to buy a loaf of bread, and he needs a trolley to be able to push that down to the shops. Now, if you're a shop owner, you don't want to accept all this money because you don't have anywhere to store it. So this was a big problem with hyperinflation, was actually the value that goods were climbing to in terms of their prices and the logistics of moving that money around. So your job now is to review your note and write down 5 key facts about hyperinflation.